All right. So today's what? July already, July 1st. Rabbit, rabbit. Is that still a thing? Do you get up in the morning and say rabbit, rabbit?
I don't know what that is.
Oh, it's a good luck thing, I'm
Oh,
told, from our kids. All right, so we'll start our recording. My name is Doug Gray, and today's a good day because Natalie's here. Who are you, Natalie? And what do you do?
hi, Doug. It's great to be with you. I'm a family-owned business consultant and coach. And one of the things you and I have in common, besides this vertical of family-owned business coaching, is an interest in well-being from a holistic lens, whether it's positive psychology or happiness studies.
Absolutely. So let me also say that you flattened me when we first met. It was at the conference in Miami with the Family Firm Institute, and you were leading a workshop. And your opening question, I didn't know who you were. Your opening question was something like, what was it? What's the most important thing we all need to be doing? Was that it?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And all the people threw out all kinds of clever ideas, and they were all above the shoulders. They were all intellectual stuff. But the most important thing that people need to be doing is,
Mindfulness,
I think,
spirituality,
yeah. And then you said breathing.
breathing.
And I love that because then it was your transition into the content that you presented in that workshop. But what a great metaphor for today in our pandemic, our global recession, and a lot of families retrenching, and a lot of families investing in wealth distribution to their loved ones to protect their assets. So I love that point about breathing. Thanks for it.
Yes, it's the thing that we do without thinking about it. But if we didn't do it, there would be so many more complications. And actually, we don't do it enough. I mean, the studies show that when we are having duress or anxiety, our parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system really kicks in, and it either depresses or accelerates our breathing rate, which then has all kinds of other impacts on our bodies.
I've been thinking about that fact, the neurobiological fact, in the protests, the social protests that we're seeing, and all the T-shirts globally that now say "I can't breathe."
Mm,
What a metaphor!
absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah.
so let's breathe into this whole idea of positive psychology. What the heck is it? Everybody defines it different ways, but you're an expert. So how do you define positive psychology?
Well, I might define it a little differently because I venture on the happiness studies side, which is positive psychology as well as literature and economics and some other things mixed in. And it's really about whole person well-being. And happiness actually comes from the word how, which means whole. So it's really trying to find a way to be well. And we've researched that a lot of that really has to do with our own orientation. Our evaluation of things creates the meaning for them. And if we can evaluate them positively, that actually puts us to a trajectory to experiencing them as positive.
So it's more than smile sheets on a training program, and
Absolutely.
at a customer review after a restaurant or your shopping experience. It's
Yes.
it's wholeness,
Mhm.
well-being. What would be some examples that you're seeing maybe recently of ways in which people, especially family business owners, are practicing wholeness, practicing
Yeah.
being?
I think spiritual well-being is one of the ways that families really experience it. There's a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, and a lot of times we call that legacy.
Mhm.
So they're experiencing in that way. Ideally, their intellectual well-being or their intellectual capital, how they're learning. I think it's Dennis Jaffe and Jim Grubman's 100-Year Family study that talks about that learning families really are families that continue together. And that relational well-being, how are we spending time together? How much are we giving? Right now, that's another scarcity around COVID is loneliness is really showing up for us because we're practicing physical distancing, which is a metric of isolation. But isolation doesn't have to turn into loneliness. We
Right.
allow it to when we allow that connection to dissipate.
Boy, I agree 1,000%. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've been actively reaching out to old friends and having lively conversations, sometimes like this, sometimes recorded, sometimes not. But I'm somehow more socially connected than I was 12 months ago with folks I've known for 10 or more years. Is that true for you as well, or am I a lone duck in this?
No, it was true for me, especially at the very beginning. It's still happening. I'm having a little bit of connection fatigue as an introvert. But I think part of it is the language we're using. People have been talking about socially distancing. And so then it feels like I can't be social. So there's this scarcity
Yeah.
mindset that's actually creating a more desire for this. Now, people are talking about Zoom fatigue and so on and so forth. What we've studied with loneliness, though, is it's really the depth of connection. It's not the quantity, it's the depth. And so
Mm.
whether it's on Zoom or via phone, really hitting that depth, of really checking in with one another of how are we doing, really, and actually spending time there and not just saying okay, is helpful.
Yeah, maybe critical. Maybe those are the skills we've forgotten as younger people or younger adults. I have a friend, as an example, who, when I ask, "How are you doing?" he always pauses and he goes through a body search and he starts with his physical. Well, physically, I've got a little pain here, disjointed here. Then he goes to his emotional. My wife and I are doing whatever, and he shares that. And then he goes to the cognitive and he says, "Well, I learned something cool the other day." And then he goes to the spiritual, literally. It takes him 3 minutes to answer the "how you doing" question. And for him, the spiritual is his faith or his connection to his purpose, his life work.
I
So,
love that. I'm glad that he does that. I'm used to the opposite. Everyone says fine, but then 2 minutes into the conversation, you hear that nothing is actually fine.
right. What if we did a little deeper, survey? I'm going to ask Natalie, how are you doing? Physically,
Uh,
emotionally, cognitively, spiritually. How are you doing?
Today, good. It's we talk about a check-in as well, where we talk about ascribe, use 1 to 10. So let's say physically, 10, emotionally, probably an 8, cognitively a 9, and spiritually, I don't know, maybe a 5. That's the one that's lacking today. But then we then try to describe it. So why those might be going that way. So for me, it's not that I don't have a purpose, but I'm having some questions about how to exact that in the most effective way, given some personal circumstances, which is why my 5's down. And then the last part is we prescribe. How do we bring it up? So for me, I'm going to have to ruminate a little more to try to figure out how to bring that more in alignment with the others.
I love that. So you're doing what you preach, using assessments to monitor your behavior and reflect as needed. You'll change when you need to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's this notion in the in the medical world that we have to diagnose and treat, diagnose and treat, diagnose and treat, and that has led to a certain approach toward well-being and health. And
Hmm.
my take is that the psychological world is embracing a broader view of well-being that might do similar things. It might use assessments to not treat but recommend. And I think you're a fan of assessments. So I'm curious, do you use any assessments with positive psychology? And if so, what are they? And then how do you use them?
Yeah, so I use the VIA character strength, similar to you, Doug. I also use the Clifton Strengths Finders. Those two are the ones that are deeply rooted in positive psychology. I use several other assessments as well, but the research I've read that says even if you employ just 6% of your strengths at work, you are 60% more effective. Now, it's not to say that we can't shore up those things that we're not good at, but really understanding where we are and building upon our successes. There's also plenty of benefit finding research that shows that if we can just figure out a way we did something well once and
Yes.
look for those benefits, we're going to become more productive and more generative. It's interesting, that model of, diagnose and prescribe versus assessments here, which I really like the idea of that describe. Let's let's describe what's going on, and let's give you a menu of options, because it's quite okay maybe that, if you're a 7 today and you want to stay a 7, because there's some learning there. That anti-fragility research talks about, going through those tough times really are important. So I don't think we fix people, but I do think we help create awareness to create more choice points. And I don't think that we recognize how many choices we have when we're in the thick of it, when we're just seeing all the clouds and the mud.
Hmm. Yeah, that's why I call it assess and recommend. I think you're absolutely right. Barbara Fredrickson's research on broadening and building explores possible recommendations and options. I also kind of like the mud thing because I used to be an adventure racer. So
Really?
yeah, I
For
was on
how
PBS Sports
long?
a few times. And the whole idea was to travel to a decision point. Let's say you and I and two other people are, racing through the night and we're on our mountain bikes and it's dark and muddy. But we don't know where we're going. So we get to a decision point, a fork or a spot or a known location. And then we decide, based on this information, we assess where we are. What do you recommend we do? And then we carry on. Kind of a metaphor.
Yeah, I love it. And because yeah, you're right. Having fun adventure racing with the mud, there's nothing inherently wrong with any of these things. With people like to talk about painful experiences or pleasurable experiences, and they are just experiences. They're not experienced in us in a different way. They go through the same neural pathways and connections. Now, their impact could be less positive. And we talk about with stress, there's eustress, which is the stress that helps motivate us, get us going. And then there's de-stress, which is much more caustic and really challenges us. But it is neurochemically the same things that are going up. It's the epinephrine, it's the adrenaline, it's the cortisol. But how we decide to think about it is good or bad. It's kind of like rain, it's neutral. But if it's raining and it's flooding, we say it's bad. If it's raining and watering our plants, we say it's good.
Or if we're deluged like I was yesterday, it's cold.
It is
So
cold. I have
let's,
some right now. You might be
I
able to hear the thunder in the background.
can't hear it. So let's wrap this up. If people want to contact you, how do they do so? What's the best way?
Natalie.McVeigh at eisneramper.com. And you can just go to Eisner Amper at the Center for Individual or and Human Performance or the Center for Family Business Excellence.
Perfect. One of the things I love is that you periodically send out articles and podcasts and such, and they're always spot on, empirically based and uplifting. So thanks for doing so.
Thanks, Doug. It's a pleasure.
Yoo-hoo.